One party is falling, another is rising. And the man in charge of stopping Anthony Albanese from winning another term just called One Nation a column of smoke. If you follow Australian politics, tonight's numbers and tonight's interview are the kind of moment you don't want to miss, so stick around, because by the end of this video you'll understand exactly what is shifting inside the right side of Australian politics right now. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, this is the place where we break down Australian politics, polling, and the personalities driving the national conversation without the spin. If that sounds like your thing, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss an upload. And if you have thoughts on what you're about to hear, drop them in the comments below, because we read every single one. Let's get into it. The latest Resolve poll, published in the Sydney Morning Herald, has thrown up a genuinely interesting shift. One Nation's support has slipped 3 points, down to 26%. Meanwhile, the coalition has climbed by the exact same margin, up to 23%. Labor, for its part, hasn't moved an inch. Anthony Albanese's party sits steady on 28%. So while Labor holds its ground, there's clearly some kind of trade happening on the right. Some voters appear to be shifting from One Nation back toward the coalition. The question everyone wants answered is simple. Why is this happening? And who deserves the credit? To dig into that, this program sat down with the Shadow Energy Minister, Tehan, and the conversation did not disappoint. The first thing Tehan wanted to make clear is that nobody in the coalition is popping champagne over a single poll. His message was blunt. There is still, in his words, a hell of a lot of hard work to do. The coalition's stated mission right now is to make the Albanese government unelectable, and Tehan was upfront that this requires a real policy agenda, not just criticism. He pointed to Angus Taylor's budget in reply speech as the starting point for that agenda, but stressed that the coalition has to keep building on it, keep advocating for it, and keep getting out into communities to make the case directly to voters. At the same time, Tehan didn't shy away from the attack lines either. He accused Anthony Albanese of being untrustworthy and pointed to what he described as the biggest fall in living standards of any country in the industrialized world happening under this government. That's a striking claim, and it's the kind of talking point you can expect to hear repeated by coalition figures in the months ahead, whether or not you agree with the framing. So here's the real question the host put directly to him. Is this poll bump because of the coalition's own work, or is it simply that some of the shine has come off One Nation? Tehan, unsurprisingly, didn't want to comment on One Nation's internal position. Instead, he pivoted back to his own party's job, acknowledging that polls go up and down, but insisting that Angus Taylor has started strongly and that the real task between now and the next election is building a credible alternative government that Australians can trust. He extended that beyond energy policy too, name-checking economic policy and education policy as areas where the coalition still has to prove itself. Now here's where things get spicy. The host raised something Angus Taylor said in his most recent speech, delivered just days ago, where he described One Nation as, quote, a column of smoke. That is not a subtle line. So what did he mean by it? According to Tehan, the point Taylor was making is about substance. Being a credible alternative government, in his telling, requires sound economic policy with real depth behind it, not just slogans. He used a live example to make the point. Reports that the Reserve Bank could be handed more power that Tehan worries could be used to push more renewable energy and potentially recommend a carbon tax as what he called the most rational way to pursue climate goals. His position is that the coalition, not unelected bureaucrats, should be the ones setting the policy direction for the country. And that direction, he confirmed clearly, involves scrapping net zero, pursuing what the coalition is branding as energy abundance, and using every available lever to bring prices down. He also took a swipe at Labor's own energy promise, referencing the much-criticized pledge to cut power bills by $275, a promise that instead saw bills rise by roughly $1,000. His argument: if you want to be a credible alternative, your economic policy has to stand on its own 2 feet. And that, he said, was the entire point Angus Taylor was making with that line. But the host wasn't about to let that slide without pushback, and this is honestly the sharpest exchange of the whole interview. Because here's the thing. One Nation had a policy to scrap net zero long before the coalition adopted the same position. So is it really fair to call One Nation a column of smoke over a lack of substance? when the coalition arguably followed its lead. That led into the immigration question. One Nation has proposed capping immigration at 100,000 people. Is that credible? Tehan's answer was that the coalition's own approach ties immigration levels to housing capacity, arguing that any reduction in immigration needs to be sustainable and shouldn't risk damaging the economy. He pointed out that the coalition has been the first to link migration numbers directly to housing supply, a policy he said nobody else has pursued, and one he intends to keep prosecuting hard, especially given how many young Australians are currently priced out of the housing market after more than 1 million arrivals in just 2 years, which brought the host to press even harder. Because look at the pattern here. One Nation names a number, 100,000, and then the coalition responds with its own housing-linked cap. One Nation calls for scrapping net zero, and then the coalition follows with its own version, minus leaving the Paris Agreement. So when Angus Taylor turns around and says One Nation doesn't have credible policies, doesn't that risk looking like the coalition is simply borrowing One Nation's positions and then criticizing the messenger? Is there any validity to that read among voters? Tehan's response leaned on his own record. Before becoming Shadow Energy Minister, he served as Shadow Immigration Minister under Peter Dutton, and he insists the coalition was first to call for serious cuts to migration numbers, going back more than 2 years. On net zero specifically, he was candid that there have been genuinely different views within the party, tracing all the way back to when Barnaby Joyce and Scott Morrison originally signed Australia up to the net zero target. He described a frank internal debate where all sides of the argument were put on the table, but insisted the coalition. If you found this breakdown useful, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who care about this stuff. Subscribe if you haven't already, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next one, where we'll keep tracking these numbers as we get closer to the next election.